Hello everybody, it's Lilandra. Has this ever happened to you? You buy a theme deck because you want to learn about some other topic, but through the lens of tarot. Full of excitement, you crack that new deck open. You flip through the cards and you see a bunch of images that aren't structured like the Rider-Waite Smith and that don't make visual reference to those scenes. When you don't connect instantly, or you can't relate the images to your existing knowledge base without outside study, you set it aside. Planning, absolutely, to get back to it when you have more time. But as we all know, that more time often doesn't arise. And in the end, you give up on it. And that's what was happening to me when it comes to the Shakespearian tarot. I actually set up recording of what was going to be a quick flip through and a listing of the deck for sale. I've had this deck in my collection since the 1990s, but I'd never even read with it. It just traveled around in my storage totes like grandmother's china. But I'm in the life stage now where I'm doing Swedish death cleaning, and I'm intentionally breaking down my collection so it can fit in a smaller space. I have in the range of about 300 decks in my collection, so kind of a medium-large collection. And in the process, I'm also cataloging and taking group photos of all my decks. So there I was, going through, just trying to do a flip through, and I don't remember which card it was, but I just stopped and I'm like, what? And you know, that would have been fine, but as I was looking into Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki to put the information in my catalog, I realized that this deck actually had something to teach me. And it was time to make the time. So that's kind of what I did here. This deck was published in 1993 by Aquarian Press. And that is the version that I have. You can see how beat up this box is. Grandmother's china and the storage totes have not really been as friendly as they ought to have been. There have been a couple of editions of this deck. There was also the Diamond Books edition in 1997, and in fact, it has finally been reprinted. And you can find this deck, even though it's out of print with major publishers, you can find it pretty easily on the used market. And I suspect that may be because other people have run into the same difficulties I did when I first started on it. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki is the creator of the Shakespearian tarot. She's a renowned British occult author of over 30 books and 2 tarot decks. The Servants of the Light Tarot is the other deck. And she's traveled the world tirelessly, delivering seminars, lectures, and practice workshops. Having been born in 1929, she is now 96 years old in 2025, but she is still with us. In a 2016 interview, she said of those workshops that between her and the other Servants of the Light supervisors, they probably gave around 40 workshops a year. So even in her 80s, oh my goodness. Her book, The Shining Paths, was the first to open up the long-held secret of the power of pathworking. She was part of a living magical lineage stretching back to Dion Fortune and back through there to the Golden Dawn. She trained with Walter Ernest Butler, eventually succeeding him as the Director of Studies of the Servants of the Light in 1976, and serving as that Director of Studies for 42 years, retiring in 2018. Paul Hardy is the artist of this deck, and it's a little harder to find information about him, but I did find this nice page on A Libris. He studied architecture at Bristol University and Columbia Pacific University. After graduating, he became assistant to the architect surveyor at Exeter Cathedral. He went on to become a Methodist minister in South Africa, the USA, and the UK. Then he retired, but he is the author of several city profiles and the care and preservation of English medieval cathedrals and churches. He has demonstrated for major art materials supplier and has produced videos on pastel and watercolor techniques. So here we can see the blurb about this tarot, and I'll let you read it. I don't need to read it for you. Dolores, when she was introducing her deck in her book, she said, "Why no one has thought before of interpreting the tarot through the medium of Shakespeare, I cannot imagine. Not only does it lend itself visually to the meaning of the cards, but the entire collection is filled with occult and mystical references that make it a natural choice. And that's maybe one of the things that sort of piqued my interest. It's like, that is true. Shakespeare is kind of tied up in a lot of this symbology, and so it's not really crazy to do a deck about Shakespeare, because you may be getting more layers than you often do in a theme deck. And she also said that she has always loved the theater and trained for both drama and opera. But there came a time when I had to make a choice and a sacrifice, so this was a passion project. Shakespeare has always been a love of mine, she said. The wording, the tone, the many shapes the words can be made to induce. I train students to use the voice as a magical tool. The first card was the Lovers, a natural for Romeo and Juliet. It just grew from there, but it took a long time to match the quotations with the images. So these are the backs of the cards, and they are kind of, I think this is meant to be wood that has been engraved and carved with this nice urn pattern with all the plant material coming out of it, which is kind of reminiscent of a Marseille card. The 4 suits of the Shakespearian tarot are scepters for the fire suit, crowns for the water suit, swords for the air suit, and orbs for the earth suit. I'm showing a picture from the English crown jewels from the royal collection of His Majesty Charles III. Then the court cards in this deck, the king is king, the queen is queen, the knight is lord, and the page is lady. And I did satisfy myself, if you follow the rabbit hole of who is air and who is fire, and how do you correlate Golden Dawn decks, I'm pretty certain this is the correct correlation that is intended for this deck, even though it's not actually said in the documentation. I had said earlier that this deck was available after having gone out of print for many years from another small press, and that is Datura Press, which is the press of Debbie Chapnick. She was entrusted to organize and publish Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki's archives, and there are volumes and volumes of the archives and rituals and audio recordings of path workings and lectures that you can get at that site. And I believe it is $45 to buy the deck and companion book as it has been republished. So let's talk a little bit about the theme of this deck. Shakespeare's plays are a canon of about 39 dramatic works written by the English playwright and poet William Shakespeare. Many people have found knowing Shakespeare important in their lives. For instance, Abraham Lincoln took insight from the plays as he reckoned with the tortured political dilemmas and private griefs of his life. Ethan Anderson writes, Lincoln had an intense love of Shakespeare and filled many of the elusive free moments he had as commander-in-chief with those famous verses. So great was this love that those who knew him well, and even those who didn't, had grown accustomed to the melancholy, contemplative president, breaking into long Shakespearean recitations any time he got the chance. One of the greatest speechwriters in American history taught himself to read and write without ever going to school for more than a year, and evidence suggests that Shakespeare was present in Lincoln's quest for self-knowledge from the beginning. In the past, people used to memorize poems. As Clive Anderson writes in The Curious Power of Memorizing Poems, all those poems become enmeshed in the way you think, and even the way you notice the world around you. Shakespeare's plays are written both in prose and in poetry, and there's a whole scheme behind who says what in which. Iambic pentameter is a favored meter, and it shows up in the famous closing line in the intro to Star Trek, oddly enough, to boldly go where no one's gone before. The power of iambic pentameter lies in its ability to create a natural yet formal rhythm that makes a line of poetry or speech musical, memorable, and emotionally resonant. It mimics the rhythm of a heartbeat and natural speech, making it sound both familiar and profound. And so Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki mapped quotes to the tarot archetypes, choosing just the right scene, just the right words to match the meaning of the cards. It wasn't always easy, and in a few cases she had to make compromises. There simply wasn't a perfect match. Discussing the difficulty of designing the Empress and Sun, she wrote, "The most obvious quote for the latter, this shining Son of York, by no means gave the right impression when looked at in the larger sense of the play. The backbone of meanings comes through the servants of light lineage and Dion Fortune's exposure to Book T when she was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. In the book accompanying the deck, Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki frequently gives the Book T titles for the pip cards. Because the Golden Dawn and its Book T was also an influence on A.E. Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith, Book T meanings work with the Rider-Waite-Smith, and thus if your personal meanings work with that deck, they'll generally work with the Shakespearean tarot. But that does not mean that the scenes depicted have any visual relationship to those on the RWS. As Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki wrote, none of the usual symbols and signs have been used for this deck. Nothing but what the play it represents would have shown. Of themselves, the vignettes give the message clearly and precisely. But to get that message, you really do need some familiarity with the plays. And this is probably why this deck is not as well known and well used as others with less to say. To a person educated to the past standard of a past era, or a theater aficionado, a Shakespearean quote encapsulates the memory of an entire scene, complete with historical associations. To a person educated to the standard of a past era, or a theater aficionado, a Shakespearean quote encapsulates the memory of an entire scene, complete with historical associations, similar to Darmok and Jalad Tanagra, the Star Trek The Next Generation. Unfortunately, not all of us today have that literacy. In the Shakespearean deck, the context is as important as the immediate quote. Without ever having seen the scene in which the quote occurs, some of the choices can be puzzling. Sometimes you really need to know the entire play, without which the quote is kind of meaningless. And I feel that this deck is underappreciated because of that. I found that going through and looking at all of the plays, sorting the cards out by play, and looking and finding where those quotes happen and what was going on, was giving myself a little self-education in the entire corpus of Shakespeare, certainly in no depth whatsoever. And falling down this rabbit hole of researching Shakespeare and the books written by Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki these past weeks in preparation from this video has been quite valuable for me. Because I suspect there are others out there who, like me, have this deck but didn't have the background to fully appreciate it, I decided to make a much longer video than I was first anticipating and recap my journey. So let's set the stage. I'm going to be showing you not just the Shakespearean deck, but also a deck that represents Book T and which has titles that would also have been relevant down through the Dion Fortune line, and which sometimes in the book that accompanies the deck do get quoted. So this is the Hermetic Tarot by Godfrey Dawson. And then this is just a generic deck that has the Rider-Waite-Smith image and various keywords so that you can, as we go through, not in order, kind of remind yourself, does this make sense, given some generic meanings that people attribute to the Rider-Waite-Smith. So you can kind of see it all together in one place. And I have organized the Shakespearean cards in order by play and in order by the act and scene in which the quote given, which is at the bottom of the Shakespearean card, appears. So the first play we'll look at is a comedy, and 24 of the cards in this deck are from comedies, from 10 of the 16 plays that Shakespeare did. And this comedy is As You Like It. As You Like It follows its heroine, Rosalind, as she flees persecution in her uncle's court, accompanied by her cousin, Celia, to find safety and eventually love in the forest of Arden. So it's kind of like a Robin Hood setting. In fact, that is a theme that gets picked up more than once within Shakespeare plays. She meets various characters, including the man she loves, and eventually orchestrates many happy endings and a group wedding ceremony. So let's take a look at this card again, knowing that that is the play that came from. All the World's a Stage. This is spoken by a character, Jaques, and is a metaphor comparing life to a play with people as actors who have exits and entrances and play many roles throughout their lives. And it goes through 7 ages of man. I have a document that I'm going through as I do this video, and that will be linked to the description of the video down below. And within that document, I have links oftentimes to the scene, if I could find it on YouTube, and certainly to the play, if not, so that you can actually see things in context. So anyways, in this, it's really not a picture from the play. It is really a picture representing all of Shakespeare's plays in a way. It's taking place in the wooden O of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, and there are all these shields represent the 4 quarters. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says of this card, "The major arcana is now complete. The fool has come full circle. The actor closes the play." Now, the last card did not show a scene from the play. This card does. And our old friend Tenacity, with our guy who has suffered all of the slings and arrows, but is still persevering. What? People dancing? What? So, if you don't know the Robin Hood plot parallel and the journey that it took to get to this wedding, because that's what this is, the image on the Shakespearean card probably won't make sense. Just before this quote, all the loose ends that created the exile of Duke Senior and his daughter Rosalind got tied up. And now the romantic couples in the play will complete their tying up in a wedding. It took tenacity, especially on the part of Duke Senior, who says, "Proceed, proceed. We will begin these rites, as we do trust they'll end in true delights." The last speech in the play before Rosalind's epilogue speech. Victory, preceded by apprehension and fear, is the meaning in Book T for the Lord of Great Strength. So they do work, but you kind of have to know what's going on to make that connection. In the last play, As You Like It, one of the plot elements is a bunch of cross-dressing by the main character, and oddly, cross-dressing romance and group weddings occur in the next play, Twelfth Night. And that card also has a similar perplexity, I found, in tying the image to meanings learned from the Rider-Waite-Smith. The Twelfth Night is a story where you have a shipwrecked young woman disguising herself as a man, becoming a servant to a duke that she then falls in love with, and navigating a web of romantic confusion and mishaps that are eventually resolved with a group wedding. Now, in the Rider-Waite-Smith image, of course, we have our figure overlooking the ships in the bay. And what's going on might be the man is about to set off an adventure with a sense of breaking new ground and going into the unknown, looking ahead to the future with excitement and anticipation. Or perhaps it's a rags to riches story, and now he's the owner of the ships. The first card from this play is the Three of Scepters, and it's actually depicting a line from a song, "O Mistress Mine," and it's a song that this fool sings. The scene in which this song is sung is actually kind of the point of the card and not the song itself, which contains the line, "Present mirth hath present laughter." In the scene in which the song is sung, a plan is hatched and plotted out by drunken revelers to prank and embarrass a puritanical household steward. Beyond its entertainment value, the song is actually a meditation on seizing the moment. I'll quote all the lines of the song because it's not long. "O mistress mine, where are you roaming? O stay and hear your true love's coming, that can sing both high and low. Trip no further, pretty sweeting, journey's end in lovers' meeting, every wise man's son doth know. What is love? 'Tis not hereafter. Present mirth hath present laughter." There's our quote. "What's to come is still unsure. In delay there lies no plenty. Then come kiss me, sweet and 20, youth's stuff will not endure." And so it's that sort of transient pleasure thing. But this figure here is Feste. He is the clown who sings that song. The next play that provides 2 cards, both major arcana cards, is Much Ado About Nothing. And this play was one of the inspirations, probably, for Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And it has 2 characters, Beatrice and Benedick, who are cynical and witty, and they are tricked into admitting their love for each other, ultimately, in the play. And both cards associated with this play feature the character Beatrice having witty exchanges. The first one is the Star card. And in this one, "A star danced, and under that I was born." Beatrice is talking to another character, Don Pedro, who says, "To be merry best becomes you, for out of question you were born in a merry hour." And she's arguing with him, "No, sure, my lord, my mother cried, but then there was a star danced, and under that I was born." That reflects an old belief that a person's birth under a dancing star, a star danced, was a sign of a fortunate life. Today we might say born under a lucky star. In the next card we quote another song, a song called "Sigh No More, Ladies, Sigh No More." And what's so interesting about Sigh No More is that it takes the whole idea of female deception and turns it on its head to talk about male deception. The inconstancy of men is skewered here. But of course, it's the line in the song. This verse goes, "Men were deceivers ever, one foot in sea and one on shore, to one thing constant never." And it's that one foot in sea and one on shore visual illusion that I'm sure is the reason why that quote was selected for this card. Temperance is not about inconstancy, being unable or unwilling to choose sides, but on sort of blending or on an alternative to choosing sides at all. It exists outside of those extremes. And the image on the card is Beatrice and Benedick and their battle of wits. The next comedy that contributes 2 cards is The Gentleman of Verona, and this contributes the Fool and the 7 of Scepters. This story contains 2 best friends, Valentine and Proteus, and Proteus's servant, Launce, who has a dog, Crab, who steals the scene. They both fall in love with the same woman. There's betrayal, banishment, cross-dress pursuit, reconciliation, and a double marriage in a forest full of outlaws. So the first card that it contributes is the Fool, and that's a line by Proteus's servant Launce, who is, when Proteus is banished to Milan, his servant Launce is forced to go along. He has the line, "I am but a fool, look you, and yet I have the wit to think my master is a kind of a knave. But that's all one, if he be but one knave." The other card contributed from the 2 Gentlemen of Verona is the 7 of Scepters. And in this case, we have the other of the best friends, Valentine, and a character named Speed, and they have run into a group of outlaws who challenge them and ultimately recruit Valentine to be their leader. The outlaws say, "We'll do thee homage and be ruled by thee, love thee as our commander and our king. But if thou scorn our courtesy, thou diest." The Merchant of Venice contributes 5 cards to this deck. In this play, which there's quite a bit of debate as to just how badly anti-Semitic this play is, there is a Venetian merchant named Antonio who defaults on a loan taken out on behalf of his friend Bassanio from the Jewish moneylender Shylock, and they make a big deal about him being Jewish, who demands a pound of his flesh as payment, leading to a dramatic courtroom confrontation where the heiress Portia, disguised as a lawyer, saves Antonio life. The play contains at least two famous speeches, that of Shylock, "Hath not a Jew eyes?" on the subject of humanity, and that of Portia on the quality of mercy. And that speech is actually depicted on the justice card. But we'll look at the first card that it contributes, and that is the Four of Orbs, which is coins in this deck. The quote it gives, "Believe me, no, I thank my fortune for it." The context of this quote: in this scene, Antonio and his friends Salarino and Salanio are discussing the frailty of a merchant's fortunes, bound up in ships upon the high seas. Antonio is confident that all will be well, unlike this guy who feels very grasping, but they're really kind of two sides of the same coin. Salarino says, "But tell not me, I know Antonio is sad to think upon his merchandise." And Antonio says, "Believe me, no, I thank my fortune for it. My ventures are not in one bottom, one ship, trusted, nor to one place, nor is my whole estate upon the fortune of this present year. Therefore my merchandise makes me not sad." The next card, the Five of Crowns, or the Five of Cups, has a quote and depicts something that happens two scenes later in Act 2. So the line itself, "What gold and jewels she is furnished with," refers to the amount of money and valuables that Jessica, the Jewish merchant Shylock's daughter, is to steal to take with her when she elopes with Lorenzo. And the card depicts the moment of elopement with Jessica dressed as a boy carrying a sack. Something startles her as she is closing the door, and she drops the sack of gold and treasure. Now the next card, the Four of Crowns, is one that caused me some confusion, because I really kind of thought, let's see if we can find, where's that four? I really thought it might be a reference to the Four of Pentacles until I found enough of the Golden Dawn quotes to confirm for myself whether crowns or orbs were cups or pentacles. But this is the Four of Cups. When she repeats the name from the Golden Dawn, that makes it clear. So don't let that confuse you like it confused me at first. In this scene, Shylock is sitting in the chair, a heavy chest of treasure at his feet, having just awakened from a dream concerning gold and money. He interprets his dream as a premonition of a disaster. The quote from the next card is a very famous quote out of this play, and it is the character Portia, the one who actually, the friend, borrowed money, but using the name of Antonio and his creditworthiness. So there's Antonio, he's got his shirt down. There's Shylock, the moneylender. And here's Portia, who is serving, dressed as a lawyer, holding the scales to weigh a pound of flesh and a knife to cut the flesh. And in that quote, strained is actually meaning constrained or forced. So she is telling Shylock that mercy must be freely given, and inviting him to show mercy to the title character, Antonio. So the quote is, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes." Very famous quote. And the final card from the Merchant of Venice is the Ten of Orbs. And this is Lorenzo and Jessica, Shylock's daughter, standing on a balcony, having eloped and hidden themselves away. Their worries are for the moment behind them. Lorenzo says, "How sweet the moonlight sleeps upon this bank. Here we will sit and let the sounds of music creep in our ears. Soft stillness and the night become the touches of sweet harmony. Sit, Jessica, look how the floor of heaven is thick inlaid with patinas of bright gold. There's not the smallest orb which thou beholdest, but in his motion like an angel sings. Still choiring to the young-eyed cherubim, such harmony is in immortal souls, but whilst this muddy vesture of decay doth grossly close it in, we cannot hear it." I take the knowledge about that muddy vesture of decay over here to our old man to kind of link that up. In that speech, Lorenzo is saying that even the smallest star in the sky is one part of a cosmic harmony, as if singing like an angel. So the next play that provides us cards is The Midsummer Night's Dream. And this is a story of four lovers, a group of amateur actors, and mischievous fairies, all colliding in a magical forest, leading to confusion, comedy, and reconciliation. In the Shakespearian tarot, all four of the cards are fairy references, which is quite delightful. So this first card, the Six of Orbs, or the Six of Coins, this is a quote from a song sung by one of Titania's fairies. I do wander everywhere, and I serve the fairy queen to do her orbs upon the green. What the heck? Her orbs? What orbs? Fairy rings. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon in grassy meadows and lawns, which is a ring of lush green grass or mushrooms which slowly expands outwards. The grassy version caused by a fungus, so still mushrooms. According to the folklore of Shakespeare's day, these rings were caused by fairies, and thus it's the job of the servant fairy to water these rings for the fairy queen. So then, this is saying, it's this fairy's duty to place dewdrops on the green grass, with orbs referring to the circular fairy rings or the spherical dewdrops themselves. The fairy is performing a service for the fairy queen, bringing us back here, beautifying her domain and nourishing the land. The next card is the moon, and this is a very famous quote, sometimes a bumper sticker. Ill met by moonlight, proud Titania. This line is spoken by Oberon, the king of the fairies, to Titania, the queen of the fairies, as they meet in a forest. They are currently quarreling over a changeling boy, and this is the excuse for all kinds of insanity that happens further on in the play, including a whole lot of deceptions. So in the last card, the moon, we saw the first two court cards out of this Shakespearean deck. The King of Orbs is the first scene that happens, and here we have Oberon, the king of the fairies, and he is instructing Puck in some mischief that he is to do ultimately. But this particular quote, certain stars shot madly from their spheres, is a reference to Ptolemaic astronomy, which taught that all stars were fixed in crystalline spheres. The spheres moved around the earth, and the stars moved only as their spheres moved. And the prince and emperor of the gnomes, the King of Pentacles in Book T, is slow to anger, but furious if roused. Well, Oberon is furious about not getting the changeling child that Titania has. And that is the source of so much mischief in this play. And now we see the other half of that pair, the Queen of Pentacles, the Queen of Orbs. This is Titania, the Queen of the Fairies. She is a spirit of no common rate. She is not one to be trifled with, but in this particular case, we are seeing, let's see if I can bring this up closer. We are seeing how she has been tricked. Here we have Bottom, who has the ass's head, after he has been transformed into a donkey by Puck, the mischief that was being plotted on the King of Pentacles. The Tempest is the next play that appears in the deck, and this play will provide 4 of the cards. In this play, a castaway sorcerer uses his magical powers on a remote island to manipulate the shipwreck of his usurping brother and King Alonso, ultimately forgiving them, orchestrating his daughter's marriage, and reclaiming his dukedom of Milan. Prospero, a magician and formerly Duke of Milan, lives with his daughter Miranda and his 2 servants, Caliban, a savage monster figure, who is both compared to a fish explicitly addressed as thou earth at one point, and Ariel, an airy spirit, a spirit of air and fire. Oddly enough, all 4 of the cards that appear for this play all come from Act 5, seen one, so that's kind of unusual. And the first one, of course, is the magician. Let's bring him up a little closer. And you can see Ariel and Callan. He is a fabulously magician-like magician. Now does my project gather to a head. My charms crack not, my spirits obey, and time grows upright with his carriage. How's the day? And Ariel says, on the 6th hour, at which time, my lord, you said our work should cease. This means that his elaborate plan is reaching its final critical stage. His magic is working perfectly and his spirits are obedient, depicting Prospero with Caliban and Ariel on either side. But Prospero also appears in this deck as the Lord of Orbs, or the Knight of Pentacles. This rough magic I'll here abjure. So he's going to stop being a magician and return to Naples as Duke once again, with all the points of the plot tied up, with Miranda and Ferdinand married and everything happily reconciled. He's going to abjure his rough magic and travel back to Milan, a promise of retirement. Quite a different figure than he was in the previous card. Pictured on the Two of Crowns, or the Two of Cups, we see the characters Ferdinand and Miranda, who are playing chess. The quote itself comes from another character who is describing their upcoming betrothal. He thinks it has been orchestrated by the gods. The quote is, I have inly wept, or should have spoke ere this. Look down, you gods, and on this couple drop a blessed crown. For it is you that have chalked forth the way which brought us hither. So the last card from The Tempest is the 8 of Scepters, the 8 of Wands. And here we see Prospero again. And in this case, he's gathered all the people who had betrayed him at the beginning, but that he has now achieved reconciliation with. And he's telling them, I'll deliver all, and promise you calm seas, auspicious gales, and sails so expeditious that shall catch your royal fleet far off. The next play is kind of a ridiculous one, I thought, reading the plot. The wandering Prince Pericles flees an incestuous tyrant, survives numerous shipwrecks and losses across the Mediterranean, and is ultimately reunited with his long-lost wife and virtuous daughter through the intervention of the gods. So let's take a look here. So this first image is a storm at sea has caused the wife of the main character, Pericles, Thaisa, to give birth prematurely to a daughter, after which she falls into a death-like trance. The superstitious sailors object to having a dead body aboard and insist that it is thrown overboard. Now, the thing that is crazy is that she's not dead. Her coffin drifts to the shores of Ephesus, and there she is revived and becomes a priestess in the great temple of Diana. So clearly this was chosen for the imagery of being on the water, going from danger to safety, success after anxiety and trouble. But the coffin drifting just seems so ridiculous to me. So the next card from this play is Judgment. And this card is picturing Pericles, his wife, and his daughter. And the line comes from the epilogue of the play, where it says, in Antiochus and his daughter you have heard of monstrous lust, the due and just reward. In Pericles his queen and daughter seen, although assailed with fortune fierce and keen, virtue preserved from fell destruction's blast, led on by heaven and crowned with joy at last. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says of this, the play has at least the right ingredients for the card. She kind of admits that it's a stretch. Right down to the coffin on the water, plus the man, woman, and child. Here in the card is the white marble temple of Diana. Rebirth, rejoicing, and rejuvenation are the words for this card. It holds the meaning of someone who has come through a testing time and who has now put it all behind them and is determined to go on. The Taming of the Shrew contributes just one card, the Six of Cups, and this is the wealthy suitor Petruchio and all of his psychological and physical abuse of Catherine so that he can tame her and win her hand in marriage. And this is somehow a comedy. In this first scene, he is explaining to his old friend Hortensio that since his father's death, he has set out to enjoy life and get married. And hearing this, his friend, who wants to court Catherine's younger sister, Bianca, is recruiting him to be a suitor for Catherine. And Petruchio says, "And I have thrust myself into this maze, happily to wive and thrive as best I may. Crowns in my purse I have, and goods at home, and so am come abroad to see the world." The final comedy represented in this deck is The Winter's Tale. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki is choosing a pretty small moment out of this that doesn't necessarily even represent the play very much, but she said it was very hard to find a suitable figure for the Empress because motherly figures are in short supply. She is at least pregnant when the play begins, and in fact is already the mother of a small son. So in the Empress card, Queen Hermione is asking her son, Mamilius, to tell a story to entertain her, setting the stage for him to begin his tale of sprites and goblins. The phrase winter's tale itself refers to a story told for amusement on a winter's evening. So the quote is, "What wisdom stirs amongst you? Come, sir, now I am for you again. Pray you sit by us and tell us a tale." So that brings us to the end of the comedies. The plays that are comedies that do not have any cards are The Merry Wives of Windsor, Measure for Measure, The Comedy of Errors, Love's Labor Lost, All's Well that Ends Well, and The Two Noble Kinsmen. Tragedies is the next category, and 27 of the cards are from tragedies, from 8 of the 12 plays. And the first tragedy that we'll look at is Romeo and Juliet. And this is one that most people have kind of a clue about what's going on. So that makes it perhaps a bit easier. So this first card, the Two of Scepters, what's going on here is that the character Samson, who is a servant from the Capulet house, is talking to his fellow servant Gregory. They're discussing their readiness to fight the Montague servants, with Samson boasting about his own quick temper and willingness to strike. Samson says, "I strike quickly, being moved." Gregory says, "But thou art not quickly moved to strike." Samson, "A dog of the house with Montague moves me." Gregory, "To move is to stir, and to be valiant is to stand. Therefore, if thou art moved, thou runst away." And then Samson, "A dog of that house shall move me to stand. I will take the wall of any man or maid of Montague's." The book T meaning for the Lord of Dominion, boldness, courage, fierceness, shamelessness, resolution, turbulent, and so forth. The Lady of Scepters, or the Page of Wands, is Juliet's nurse. And the quote that's being shown here, Lady Capulet is saying that Juliet needs to get married. And so she says to her, "Mary, that Mary is the very theme I came to talk of. Tell me, daughter Juliet, how stands your disposition to be married?" And Juliet says, "It is an honor that I dream not of." And her nurse says, "An honor? Were not I thine only nurse, I would say thou hadst sucked wisdom from thy teat." So that is where the "thine only nurse" quote comes from. Now with the Four of Scepters, I'm not 100% sure that they go together perfectly, but I'll tell you how this quote comes about. So this is Mercutio's long Queen Mab speech, which is a famous speech in Romeo and Juliet, where he mocks Romeo's belief that dreams are prophetic. Mercutio argues that dreams are just the nonsensical creations of an idle brain, sent by the fairy Queen Mab to suit an individual's desires. He says, "True, I talk of dreams, which are the children of an idle brain, begot of nothing but vain fantasy, which is as thin of substance as the air and more inconstant than the wind." It's a very long speech, but that's the passage that has talking of dreams. Now with the Two of Orbs, our juggling man turns into a discussion about the moon. Juliet and Romeo are together, and Juliet says, Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her circled orb, lest that thy love prove likewise variable. The meaning here is plain: changes are all about us. The Lord of harmonious change, the harmony of change, alternation of gain and loss, being variable, being inconstant. So that's basically where that card is coming from. And now we get to the first ace in the deck. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says each ace card is depicted as a showpiece. That is to say, it is placed alone within a stage setting that throws its qualities forward and imprints them on the senses. And in this case, this suit, the orb is this sign of sovereignty, this very heavy object. But it is also astronomy of the time. Each heavenly body in the astronomy of Shakespeare's time was fixed in a sphere, which is what the circled orb is talking about, which revolved around the earth. And those spheres were supposed to be perfect, but the sphere of the moon appeared to be highly erratic. So again, we are referring back to the very same speech that we just saw on the last card, the Two of Orbs. This was actually the card that when I was flipping through the deck rapidly, I just stopped and I'm like, what? So my key phrase that I use for the Two of Swords when I'm looking at a Rider-Waite-Smith type picture is balanced on the horns of a dilemma. The book T phrase is the Lord of Peace restored, sacrifice and trouble, yet strength arising therefrom, as though the pain itself had brought forth beauty. What's going on in the picture is actually the duel in which Mercutio is killed. Tybalt, a kinsman of the Capulets and cousin to Juliet, is dueling with Mercutio, a friend of Romeo, from the Montague family. Romeo and Benvolio attempt to break up the fight. Mercutio, distracted, does not see his opponent and is fatally wounded by Tybalt under Romeo's arm. Feeling his death approaching, Mercutio declares, "I am hurt, a plague on both your houses, I am sped," done for. Is he gone, and hath nothing, hath no injury? Mercutio dying repeats the phrase, "a plague on both your houses," 3 times. The triple curse almost literally comes true when there's a plague quarantine that stops Romeo from getting a letter that Juliet is not dead. And now we get to the first card design for the deck, the Lovers. And here we see the clandestine marriage of Romeo and Juliet in Friar Lawrence's cell. The quote itself is actually from after the fight with and murder of Tybalt, and Romeo has learned that his punishment is banishment and not death. And he gets help from the friar and the nurse to see Juliet before his exile. And they get to spend one last night together. So the next tragedy is King Lear, and this will supply 4 cards in the deck. And this is a story of an aging king who divides his kingdom amongst his daughters based on their flattery, only to be betrayed by those who have the most, leading to madness and ruin. And the quote of the first card is where he is asking all of his daughters how much they love him, and his daughter Cordelia refuses to lie or flatter him, and it's therefore not as flattering as what the older sisters, who were willing to say whatever to get a bigger share of his kingdom, would say. And he foolishly is going to disinherit her for not being flattering enough. The quote that King Lear says is, "Let it be so, thy truth then be thy dower, for by the sacred radiance of the sun, the mysteries of Hecate and the night, by all the operation of the orbs from whom we do exist and cease to be, here I disclaim all my paternal care, propinquity and property of blood, and as a stranger to my heart and me, hold thee from this forever." So this is the first major betrayal in the play, and that is one of the meanings here. Now the Hermit card is showing Lear and his fool crossing a desolate moorland in the driving rain and sleet. And Lear is raging against the elements. Lear says, "Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow, you cataracts and hurricanes. Spout till you have drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks, you sulphurous and thought-executing fires, vaunt couriers of oak-cleaving thunderbolts, singe my white head, and thou, all-shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of the world. In the Five of Orbs, or the Five of Coins, I'm sure it's just the words in the quote that really make this immediately come to mind. We're referring to the visual image in the Rider-Waite-Smith. And Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says of this, Lear stands at the beginning of his madness. One can see its approach in his eyes and in the baleful stormy sky that outlines his ragged figure. And the quote is, through tattered clothes small vices do appear, robes and furred gowns hide all. Now you could say that the story of King Lear is the Wheel of Fortune all by itself, but this particular quote is coming from a moment in the play where the scheming brother, there's two half-brothers that duel, and one who is the schemer has been finally had his schemes catch up with him. And he's resigned to his defeat, recognizing things that he has done have rebounded on him. Thou hast spoken right, 'tis true. The wheel is come full circle. I am here. Of course, the card doesn't actually show that duel, but instead it has a wheel of royalty with emblems of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England, interspersed with the personal shields and badges of the monarchs of England. So the next play supplies three cards, and that is Troilus and Cressida. It's set during the Trojan War, and it involves a love affair between the Trojan prince Troilus and the Trojan woman Cressida, sours into betrayal and disillusionment, paralleled by political discord and the brutal, dishonorable killing of the Trojan hero Hector by Achilles and his myrmidons. So now we can take a look at the cards, and it is interesting to me that in the Shakespeare deck, the sword is point down, not point up, as you more commonly will see. The quote from Troilus that is on this card, you are for dreams and slumbers, brother priest. You fur your gloves with reason. Here are your reasons. You know an enemy intends you harm. You know a sword employed is perilous, and reason flies the object of all harm. In the Eight of Swords, we see Cressida in the Trojan camp just before dawn. And Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says, decisions surround her like swords. The quote is spoken by Cressida, and she says, my thoughts were like unbridled children, grown too headstrong for their mother. See, we fools, why have I blabbed? Who shall be true to us when we are so unsecret to ourselves? This is the Lord of shortened force. Too much force applied to small things, too much attention to detail at the expense of more important points. Now in the Five of Scepters, we see Hector and Ajax fighting, and the statements, the quotes, are coming from people in the background who are basically giving a blow-by-blow of the fight. Agamemnon says, they are in action. Nestor says, now, Ajax, hold thine own. Troilus, Hector, thou sleepest, awake thee. Agamemnon, his blows are well disposed there, and on and on. So this is kind of interesting. It's the Lord of Strife, violent strife and boldness. I don't know that it's always going to be a fatal fight, which in this case it is. I've often thought of this card as politics and boys kind of play fighting, but it's a little more serious here. So the next play is Julius Caesar, and this gives us three cards, and I'll bet you can guess which three those are. This play is a story, a group of Roman senators assassinate the powerful Julius Caesar, fearing he will become king, leading to a civil war that ultimately destroys the conspirators. So here's the first one, no surprise, the Chariot. And in this case, Cassius is speaking to Brutus, two conspirators. The image of Julius Caesar, the mighty general, straddling the whole world like a colossus, summons the Colossus of Rhodes, a giant bronze statue of Apollo. That was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. There was a common belief that this statue straddled the harbor in Rhodes, although this is almost certainly wrong. And we do see that echoed amusingly in Braavos in the Game of Thrones. We see that same kind of statue. Nevertheless, it's a powerful mental image. Julius Caesar standing mighty and tall across the world, which seems narrow in comparison with the might of this great ruler. Cassius's quote is, "Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of our fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings." Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says of this, Cassius, a man so eaten with envy that it ended in the murder of a man who had been his friend. So the emperor is hardly a surprise to represent Julius Caesar, and this speech itself is a quote where Julius Caesar is saying it to assert his unwavering and unchangeable nature, much like the star's perceived fixed position in the sky. He uses this comparison to declare that he cannot be swayed by persuasion, a statement that is made right before he is assassinated by his conspirators. So this is part of the last speech. "I could be well moved if I were as you. If I could pray to move, prayers would move me. But I am constant as the northern star, of whose true fixed and resting quality there is no fellow in the firmament." And this is hardly a surprise that this is a scene chosen to depict the Ten of Swords. Instead of the speech about A2 Brutus, we are referring to the soothsayer, but it's the same scenery. And the soothsayer occurs more than once talking about the Ides of March. And finally, we have where the soothsayer is saying in Act 3, "The Ides of March are come." To which Caesar famously replies, "Aye, Caesar, but not gone." But it is very shortly gone. And now we have 3 more cards from the play Antony and Cleopatra. In this play, the Roman general Mark Antony abandons his kingdom and wife to pursue a passionate and destructive love affair with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra, which leads to their downfall. So the first card that Cleopatra represents in this is strength. In this, she is saying, "Now to that name my courage prove my title. I am fire and air. My other elements I give to baser life. So have you done." Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says of this, "Cleopatra is confident of her own sexuality and its power, so is the lion, and together they balance the esotic power within." Fire and air together. Cleopatra also stands in for the high priestess in this deck. And in this case, she is getting ready to cross the veil in the other direction. This is as she is preparing for her death, symbolizing her desire for transcendence and dignity over capture and humiliation by Octavius Caesar. She's going to die on her own terms to be reunited with Antony, rather than having Caesar parade her through the streets of Rome like a wild animal in a cage. So the quote here, "Give me my robe, put on my crown, I have immortal longings in me. Now no more the juice of Egypt's grape shall moist this lip." Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says of this, "Here is the feminine principle manifesting its powers, and they are many. Power of form, power of majesty, power of silence, power of beauty, power of pure manifestation in every way. Looking past the human woman, we catch a glimpse of the primordial womb mother, Mut. Here is stillness and the moment of becoming, the moment of change within and without." Cleopatra's end comes from the bite of a poisonous snake, perhaps reflecting the little snake coming out of that chalice in the Rider-Waite 7 of Cups. And this line is spoken by Charmian, who is Cleopatra's servant. She's attending to the dying queen Cleopatra and making this final statement of Cleopatra's noble lineage, her fitting demeanor in her final moments. She says, "It is well done, and fitting for a princess descended of so many royal kings. Ah, soldier, Charmian dies." So then the servant also suffered from that snake bite. Book T, the Lord of Illusory Success, says possible victory, but neutralized by the supineness of the person, very supine when in death. The next tragedy, the Scottish play, is one that also supplies 3 cards. This is one that many of us know lines from, even if we really don't know anything about Shakespeare. Double, double, boil and trouble, the washing of the hands, out, out, damned spot, and so forth. The first card that comes from this play is the 6 of Scepters. And this is earlier in the play. Macduff and Lennox arrive at Macbeth's castle to rouse King Duncan, and their persistent knocking breaks the silence following the king's murder. Macbeth's fate is knocking for him, not just metaphorically, but literally. And so the porter is saying, "Here's a knocking indeed. If a man were porter of Hellgate, he should have old Turning the key." The next card, the 8 of Crowns, or the 8 of Cups in other decks, is the Lord of Abandoned Success. And in this case, perhaps it's not intentionally abandoned, but abandoned yet it is. In this scene, Macbeth has consulted the 3 witches to find out if Banquo's line shall ever hold the throne. The witches show him various images in the fire, and this last is a parade of 8 crowned kings, each one a future descendant of Banquo. The final touch of this show of kings comes when Banquo, with hair matted with blood, smiles at him. He can smile because all of those kings are his descendants. This is a card that, if you're not careful, you might say, "Oh, that's the 7 of Cups," but no. Stylistically, it may look it, but it is not. That is something you kind of have to watch out for in multiple places in this deck, that the arrangement might remind you of something that it isn't. Well, you knew this line had to appear in the deck somewhere. "Out, damn spot, out, I say." When Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking, consumed by guilt over the murders that she and Macbeth have committed, and she's frantically trying to wash a hallucinatory spot of blood that she sees on her hands. She's trying in vain to wipe the blood from her hands. And in this image, on every step below her bare feet lies a sword, a reminder of the bloody path that she and Macbeth have trodden to the crown. This is the card that above all depicts the dark night of the soul. The next play is Hamlet, and this is going to provide 2 cards in the deck. Oddly enough, not any scene depicting to be or not to be. The first appears quite early in the play, the 3 of Orbs, or the 3 of Coins in other decks. And in this case, this is where the morning after Horatio and the guardsmen see the ghost, King Claudius gives a speech to his courtiers, explaining his recent marriage to Gertrude, his brother's widow, and the mother of Prince Hamlet. Claudius says that he mourns his brother, but has chosen to balance Denmark's mourning with the delight of his marriage to our sometime sister, but now our queen. The other card from Hamlet is the Hanged Man. And in this card, this image is not what is happening in the play, but it is something that is sort of symbolizing the course of the play. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says, "We see the ghost of Hamlet's father in full armor. He holds his son over the edge of the crenellated wall, suspended by a hangman's noose over the moat." The quote given here is spoken by Prince Hamlet when he first encounters his father's ghost. He's unsure if the apparition is a benevolent spirit or a demonic entity, and this line is his fearful plea for protection against the unknown. "Angels and ministers of grace defend us. Be thou a spirit of health or goblin damned, Bring with thee heirs from heaven or blasts from hell. Be thy intents wicked or charitable, thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. The next play supplies only one card, and that play is Othello. In this play, a villainous ensign manipulates Othello into believing his wife is unfaithful, leading to tragedy. And of course, the card is the devil. And in this card, we see Iago, who is that villainous ensign, the advisor character. And then we see Desdemona, and we see Othello, who is going to kill Desdemona for her unfaithfulness that she did not actually have. The quote that's showing on this card, Desdemona says, "No, by my life and soul, send for the man and ask him." And Othello replies, "Sweet soul, take heed of perjury. Thou art on thy deathbed." This line is a plea for her to confess her sins before he kills her, as he's convinced that she's lying about her infidelity, that Iago has convinced him of. And so she's about to die in a state of sin, because of course he's going to kill her for it. So to understand the imagery of this card, you really also need to consider Iago's soliloquy. And what's he then that says, "I play the villain"? When this advice is free, I give and honest, probable to thinking, and indeed the course to win the Moor again. For 'tis most easy the inclining Desdemona to subdue in any honest suit. She's framed as fruitful as the free elements. And then for her to win the Moor, were it to renounce his baptism, all seals and symbols of redeemed sin, his soul so enfettered to her love, that she may unmake, do what she list, even as her appetite shall play the god, with his weak function. How am I then a villain to counsel Cassio to this parallel course, directly to his good? Divinity of hell, when devils will the blackest sins upon, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows, as I do now. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says of this, Othello stands over the terrified Desdemona, who vainly tries to reason with him. Above them hangs the head of Iago himself, the whispering mouth emitting wreaths of lies. As with all lies, they are illusions, and that is the inner meaning of this card. So Othello is the last play that is represented in this deck, but there are other tragedies that have no cards, and those are Coriolanus, Titus Andronicus, Timon of Athens, and Cymbeline. And that now moves us into looking at the histories. And with this, I do have a little chart, a little family tree chart, because this is all very tied up. Most of the history plays are basically the War of the Roses, but it is bookended by King John, which happens earlier, and Henry VIII, which happens after the War of the Roses. All the plays in the middle, which is 8 plays, are in 2 tetralogies, and they were written with the later things happening first. So the first tetralogy covers the period from 1422 to 1485, and that is actually these characters down here at the bottom. And then happened the stuff that happened first in the second tetralogy. So that's very confusing if you read about it, but it doesn't really matter, I suppose, since we're going to be looking at this play by play. Having so many cards drawn from the histories, and this is another one that gives us 27 cards from 9 of the 11 plays that Shakespeare wrote, categorized as histories, gives this deck an edge when it comes to political readings, I suspect, whether those be office politics or national politics. living through this era in the United States, I definitely enjoy the YouTubers who offer political readings, and so I am very seriously considering keeping this deck and not selling it after all, just to explore if indeed I am right that this might really be the superior deck for that kind of reading. Themes of power, sovereignty, and the consequences of misrule are not unique to the Middle Ages and are especially relevant to people who live in times of great divisiveness. I'm giving these cards in the chronological order of the reigns of the kings portrayed. So the first king play that we are going to look at is King John. King John of England ruled from 1199 to 1216. And he has gone down in history as one of the very worst of the English kings. He lost the Angevin Plantagenet lands in France and so crippled England financially that the barons rebelled and forced him to sign the Magna Carta Charter of Liberties in 1215. Of course, for me, I can't think of King John without thinking of the Disney Robin Hood movie, complete with oodalolly, oodalolly, oodalolly lay. In Shakespeare's play, King John struggles to retain his stolen crown against a French-backed claim from his nephew Arthur. Facing war, excommunication, the alienation of his nobles over Arthur's death, and a final French invasion before dying of poison and leaving his son to restore peace. So that sounds like a happy ending. So what card is it that he supplies? Well, the first card is the Ten of Cups. What? So this one is a line from the play, but it's not really saying that it's about the play in total, because in fact, these are kings from all of Shakespeare's plays. So I think really the words of the quote are kind of a justification to create the image of an assembly of kings. And if you think that the histories are the best of Shakespeare's plays, then perhaps that would make this such a wonderful success image. But the quote itself, just to give you context, is Constance, who's the mother of Arthur, the nephew who is murdered, and she's being told by someone named Salisbury, "Pardon me, madam, I may not go without you to the king's." And Constance says, "Thou mayest, thou shalt, I will not go with thee. I will instruct my sorrows to be proud, for grief is proud and makes his owner stoop. To me and the state of my great grief, let kings assemble. For my grief's so great that no supporter but the huge firm earth can hold it up. Here I in sorrow sit. Here is my throne. Bid kings come bow to it." Constance's son Arthur is shut out from becoming King of England by his uncle John. All of her machinations with foreign allies come to naught. Her son is ultimately captured in battle with John. Immediately after he's become captured, she becomes tormented with grief. Her behavior is erratic and self-destructive. She even makes lewd, disgusting remarks about death. But in that speech, she's arguing that she isn't crazy. In a situation of such horrible grief, it would be crazy not to act crazy, and I certainly can't argue with that. Although that is not really the message of the Ten of Cups card. So again, I argue that quote maybe shouldn't be paid too much attention to, and instead just let yourself think about letting kings assemble and leave it right at that. So the King of Crowns, or Cups in other decks, in this deck is King John. And the quote that is given here, "the circle of my glory," comes from a speech between King John and Pandulph. King John says, "Thus I have yielded up into your hand the circle of my glory." And Pandulph hands John the crown back. "Take again from this my hand, as holding of the Pope your sovereign greatness and authority." So in this case, he symbolically surrenders his crown to Cardinal Pandulph, representing the Pope, and the circle of my glory refers to the crown and the royal authority it symbolizes. So that act signifies his submission to the authority of the church in exchange for its backing. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says of the image that it depicts King John, who seems intent upon crowning himself. The next play in the chronology of kings is King Edward III. There at the top of our tree of life. And there are no cards in this deck taken from the play King Edward III. Instead, the first card that we see will come from King Richard II. King Richard II was also known as Richard of Bordeaux. He was someone who became king as a child, and he was not really the best king. His disposition established a precedent that subjects in Parliament had the power to resist an abusive king and even depose him, a significant shift in the balance of power that would continue to be a factor in English history. His mismanagement of England and his banishing of his cousin Henry Bolingbroke leads to his deposition and eventual murder, allowing Bolingbroke to seize the throne as King Henry IV. So the King of Scepters is Richard II in this deck. He was characterized by vanity, a belief in divine right that clashed with parliamentary power, and a tendency to surround himself with unpopular favorites who supported his absolutist views. These factors led to conflict, a loss of authority, and his eventual overthrow by his cousin. Richard has been faced with the treachery of Bolingbroke and Mowbray, who is another duke, and he must find out who is the real traitor. And that is where we have this speech that produces this line. Mowbray, impartial are our eyes and ears. Were he my brother, nay, my kingdom's heir, as he is but my father's brother's son, now by my scepter's awe I make a vow. Such neighbor nearness to our sacred blood should nothing privilege him, nor partialize the unstooping firmness of my upright soul. He is our subject, Mowbray, so art thou. Free speech and fearless I to thee allow. So this next card, the Seven of Orbs, 7 of coins in a standard deck, is referring to, I suppose you could say, ancestral gardening. This is a reference back to that family tree. And you have King Edward III, who has 7 sons. From Edward the Black Prince, who is the father of King Richard II, to John of Gaunt, who is the Duke of Lancaster, whose son is Henry Bolingbroke, and many others besides. And in the quote from which this line occurs, the Duchess of Gloucester is speaking to John of Gaunt. The saying is, Edward's 7 sons, whereof thou thyself art one, were as 7 vials of his sacred blood, or 7 fair branches springing from one root. Some of those 7 are dried by nature's course, some of those branches by the destinies cut. But Thomas, my dear lord, my life, my Gloucester, one vial full of Edward's sacred blood, one flourishing branch of his most royal root, is cracked and all the precious liquor spilt, is hacked down and his summer leaves all faded by envy's hand and murder's bloody axe. And of course, Edward III had 7 sons, of whom Gaunt and Gloucester were 2. Richard's father, Edward the Black Prince, was another. Those sons were like vials, glass vessels, imagined here as bottles or jars, but with a suggestion of alchemy or medicine or magic, not ordinary bottles, full of their father's sacred blood. The blood of a king is sacred. Royal power is passed on in blood. And then as soon as those vials of blood have been evoked, the picture is complicated. Those 7 sons were also 7 branches springing from one root. The next card, the Ace of Scepters, is represented by a line from a speech spoken by John of Gaunt on his deathbed when he is communicating his vision of England's desecration. This royal throne of kings, this sceptered isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says this is a rod of power. It is wielded by the ruling monarch. It is a symbol of status, as ancient as the idea of kingship itself. The next card, the Lord of Scepters, the Knight of Wands in many other decks, represents John of Gaunt himself. And although the picture on the card is John on his deathbed, he was quite the warrior when he was younger. And of course, the speech that they're referencing is an extremely powerful one when it occurs. So don't be misled by the dying man, I suppose you could say. I've already given the speech, so I won't repeat myself. So as you can see, all but one of the scepters court happens in this play, Richard II. And this card represents his bride, the Queen Isabella of Valois. Isabella of Valois was married when she was 5 days short of her 7th birthday to a man who was 22 years her senior. Due to Richard's death just 3 years later, the marriage was never sexually consummated. However, they did enjoy a good platonic relationship, which has been compared to that between a father and his adopted daughter, or between a niece and a doting uncle. In the scene in which this quote occurs, she has been left alone when Richard went on a military campaign to Ireland. And when she was widowed after the events of the play, she refused to be remarried to Henry IV's son. She was returned to France without her dowry, married the Duke of Orleans, and died in childbirth at age 19. In the scene in the play where this occurs, she's speaking with one of Richard's favorite courtiers named Bushy, and he is saying that she should despair not, madam. And she replies, who shall hinder me? I will despair, and be at enmity with cozening hope. He is a flatterer, a parasite, a keeper back of death, who gently would dissolve the bands of life, which false hope lingers in extremity. Henry of Bolingbroke, the son of John of Gaunt, comes back early from his banishment when Richard II goes to Ireland, and manages to gather most of the nobles to his side, and together they depose Richard II when he returns from Ireland, making Henry IV the new king. So the first play is actually starting with him in middle age and his son, Prince Hal, who is carousing with great merriment with John Falstaff. And that is sort of the story of Henry IV Part 1. Henry IV Part 2, however, is the next play that we get a card in this deck from. We actually get 4 cards in this deck from Henry IV Part 2. The first card is the Page of Coins, or the Lady of Orbs. And we have Mistress Quickly and Sir John Falstaff. So you could say, because she does play such a role in Henry IV Part 1, that she could be standing in for Part 1 or Part 2. So however you would like to do that. In this case, the line comes, we're at the tavern, which is the Boar's Head, probably in Eastcheap, and Falstaff is saying, he's no swaggerer, hostess, a tame cheater in faith. You may stroke him as gently as a puppy greyhound. He'll not swagger with a Barbary hen if her feathers turn back in any show of resistance. Call him up, drawer. Mistress Quickly answers him, cheater, call you him. I will bear no honest man my house, nor no cheater. But I do not love swaggering. By my troth, I am the worse when one says swagger. Feel, masters, how I shake. Look you, I warrant you. She is owed quite a sum by Falstaff, and so she's not going to kick out someone who's actually paying his bill just on his behalf. He may be amusing, but he's certainly not earning her the coin that he should, because he's not paying his debts. The quote on this next card, the Ace of Crowns, cups in other decks, is spoken by Henry IV. And this is, of course, a very famous line. Henry IV says, canst thou, O partial sleep, give thy repose to the wet sea boy in an hour so rude, and in the calmest and most stillest night, with all appliances and means to boot, deny it to a king? Then happy low, lie down, uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. He's lamenting his inability to sleep due to the burdens of leadership. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says, "A crown is a mysterious thing, encircling and protecting as it does the anointed head of a ruling monarch." So that is sort of the vessel nature, I suppose you can say, of a crown. Because when you try to make, how does that hold water, you can see that can be a difficult place to make that comparison. In Celtic lands, the head has always been the object of worship. The Lord of Crowns, or the Knight of Cups in many other decks, in this deck is Prince Hal, who becomes King Henry V. And in this scene, although it is staged without his father present, which might have been confusing for a court card if that had been so, he is actually at his father's deathbed. And he's saying, he sees the crown has been set aside. It's not on his father's head because his father, of course, is in bed. And it is spoken to his dying father after the king has fallen into a swoon, and the prince believes him to be dead. He believes the crown is his rightful inheritance, and that is the point of the speech, which starts, "Why doth the crown lie there upon his pillow, being so troublesome a bedfellow? O polished perturbation, golden care, that keepest the ports of slumber open wide to many a watchful night, sleep with it now." And then it goes on, "This sleep is sound indeed. This is a sleep that from this golden rigor hath divorced so many English kings. Thy due from me is tears and heavy sorrows of the blood, which nature, love, and filial tenderness shall, O dear father, pay thee plenteously. My due from thee is this imperial crown, which, as immediate from thy place and blood, derives itself to me." And then at that point, he puts on the crown. This next card is the last card from this play, and it is actually a little bit puzzling to me, the choice that is depicted on it. So let's get into that. We see again Falstaff, and in this case, he is kneeling to the king, who was formerly his best buddy, Prince Hal. And Falstaff says to him, "My king, my love, I speak to thee, my heart." And the king says, "I know thee not, old man, fall to thy prayers. How ill white hairs becomes a fool and jester. I have long dreamt of such a kind of man, so surfeit swelled, so old, and so profane. But being awaked, I do despise my dream. Make less thy body hence, and more thy grace. Leave gormandizing. Know the grave doth gape for thee thrice wider than for other men. Reply not to me with a fool-born jest. Presume not that I am the thing I was. For God doth know, so shall the world perceive, that I have turned away my former self. So will I those that kept me company." And the thing that is surprising to me about this card, I've always read the Nine of Coins as something like luxury, financial independence, self-care, and none of those things seem to be happening in this scene, although the king is sort of renouncing his former party self very explicitly, and so now he's kind of going it alone without his past buddies. So I suppose that might be the connection here, but it is certainly something to ponder. The next play, Henry V, is our friend Prince Hal from the last play, all grown up, and king himself now. In this play, he asserts his claim to the French throne, inspiring his troops through rhetoric and leadership to achieve a stunning military victory at the Battle of Agincourt. And this is followed by his marriage to the princess to secure peace. The first card out of this group, the Nine of Crowns. The quote is said by the chorus in the prologue to the play. "Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene." Paul Hardy gathered together all the kings to be seen in all of the plays. And in the very front, we have Shakespeare himself accepting the applause that is his due. So this isn't really about this play. In particular, it's just taking a line from the play. And of course, in Book T, the Lord of Material Happiness signifies complete and perfect realization of pleasure and happiness. Almost perfect. I've always, and many people, consider this the wish card. This play, which gave us lines like, "We band of brothers," and "once more into the breach," starts with an insult. And if you don't know this, this card is very confusing, and the quote is of even less help. Henry IV has died, and his young son, Henry V, is crowned king, and immediately lays claim to certain dukedoms of France, sending word to the French king of his right to rule these regions. The Dauphin of France sends his messenger with the gift of tennis balls as a reply to that claim. This gift is an insulting jab at Henry's rowdy youth, associating with criminals and drunkards. The suggestion here is that Henry's claim to France is childish, and he should return to playing games. Henry takes this taunt as the final impetus for war, responding that he will strike his father's crown into the hazard and turn his balls to gunstones when he invades France. The incident highlights Henry's transformation from a playboy prince into a formidable warrior. The next card is showing the ruthlessness of a good king. King Henry says, "The mercy that was quick in us but late, by your own counsel is suppressed and killed. You must not dare, for shame, to talk of mercy, for your own reasons turn into your bosoms as dogs upon their masters, worrying you." The men depicted on this card were conspirators in the Southampton plot that involved murdering the king and placing Edmund Mortimer, the Earl of March, on the throne. That plot was foiled when the Earl of March informed the king, thus saving his own life. In this card, we're in Henry's flagship stateroom, and this is the moment of truth for three men who sold honor for money. They are Richard, Earl of Cambridge, Henry, Lord Scroop of Masham, and Thomas Grey, Knight of Northumberland. This next card shows Henry's old drinking buddies from his time in the taverns. And the quote given is from a character, Pistol, who sings this line after other soldiers express fear about the upcoming battle of Agincourt. This line glorifies the idea of winning fame through valor in battle. Pistol says, "Knocks go and come, God's vassals drop and die, and sword and shield in bloody field doth win immortal fame." Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says that this depicts the field of Agincourt. The men shown are Pistol, Nym, Bardolph, and the boy who was servant to old Falstaff. All are weary, some are wounded, there is no victor, only men at the end of their strength, and in need of rest, food, and attention. And that brings us to the Book T title, Lord of Rest from Strife. The next card shows the other side in the battle. This is the Dauphin of France and his men. It is the night before the Battle of Agincourt, and he is boasting about his horse, his war horse. He can't wait to take it out on the field. And he says, "What a long night is this! I will not change my horse with any that treads, but on 4 pasterns. Saha!" He bounds from the earth as if his entrails were hares. Le cheval volant, the Pegasus, qui a les narines de feu. When I bestride him I soar, I am a hawk, he trots the air. The earth sings when he touches it. The basest horn of his hoof is more musical than the pipe of Hermes. Orleans says, "He's of the color of the nutmeg." Dauphin replies, "And of the heat of the ginger, it is a beast for Perseus. He is pure air and fire, and the dull elements of earth and water never appear in him, but only in patient stillness while his rider mounts him. He is indeed a horse, and all other jades you may call beasts." It is a sarcastic and boastful remark about how long the night is before this battle, and he's expressing his arrogance and his impatience, full of confidence and braggadocio. This is the last card now of the play, and in this case, after the battle, King Henry is wanting to marry Princess Catherine. And this is actually Catherine of Valois, who is Isabella's sister, who was the Queen of Scepters that we spoke about earlier, the child bride to Richard II. And King Henry says, "O Kate, nice customs curtsy to great kings. Dear Kate, you and I cannot be confined within the weak list of a country's fashion. We are the makers of manners, Kate, and the liberty that follows our places stops the mouth of all fine faults, as I will do yours for upholding the nice fashion of your country in denying me a kiss. Therefore, patiently and yielding, he kisses her. You have witchcraft in your lips, Kate. There is more eloquence in a sugar touch of them than in the tongues of the French council, and they should sooner persuade Harry of England than a general petition of monarchs." And that quote, "nice customs curtsy to great kings," means that when you are in the presence of powerful rulers, the established customs of less important people are set aside to show respect for their high status. This card, therefore, is depicting the betrothal between the king and Catherine of France. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki writes, "3 crowns and 2 kingdoms and a woman to unite them, as women have always done, because they are the land. The bloodline of the land is theirs alone." So with the last play, we came to the end of the second tetralogy that actually occurred first, and we begin the first tetralogy that actually occurs after. So that's fun and confusing. And this tetralogy is really covering the War of the Roses. Now, the War of the Roses is something that inspired George R.R. Martin greatly in creating the Game of Thrones. And you can see the Starks as the Yorks and the Lannisters as the Lancasters, potentially. The first play out of this tetralogy is Henry VI, Part 1. And in this play, in the aftermath of Henry V's death, English forces led by the brave Lord Talbot battle the French, who are inspired by Joan of Arc. However, internal factionalism and the rise of the House of York and the House of Lancaster at home lead to the loss of most French territories. So the first card, and the only one from Part 1, is the Ten of Scepters. And in this case, we have an issue between the Duke of Gloucester and the Bishop of Winchester. And the servants of these two are fighting in the streets of London. The conflict erupts when Gloucester tries to enter the Tower of London, but Winchester, who has become a cardinal, denies him entry, leading to a violent clash that the mayor has to break up. So the quote goes, Winchester says, "Gloucester, thou wilt answer this before the Pope." And Gloucester says, "Winchester, goose, I cry, a rope, now beat them hence. Why do you let them stay? Thee I'll chase hence, thou wolf in sheep's array. Out, tawny coats, out, scarlet hypocrite." The bulk of the court cards in this deck come from these history plays. The scepters we've already encountered with characters in Richard II. And now we're going to be coming into the crowns. And these are related to the plays of Henry VI. And so I wanted to just show you this family tree so you could kind of see. Now, not all of the characters appear on the family tree, unfortunately. In the earlier, with Richard II, we don't actually see Isabella portrayed because there were no children from that marriage. And in this case, we don't see Duchess Eleanor of Gloucester, Eleanor Cobham, appear, but she will be appearing. And she is the wife of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, that we see on the same line at the top there, that is even with King Henry V. He has, of course, died at this point. We're looking at Henry VI, but I just kind of wanted to give you this context. In the play Henry VI, Part 2, that supplies the Lady of Crowns, the court of the weak King Henry VI erupts into bitter factionalism between the houses of York and Lancaster, leading to the murder of the respected Duke Humphrey, a commoners' rebellion led by Jack Cade, and the decisive first battle of the Wars of the Roses that secures the Yorkist claim to the throne. So with the Lady of Crowns, we see Eleanor Cobham, or the Duchess Eleanor of Gloucester, who is the Lady of Crowns. And she is in a dream. she is seated on the royal throne in Westminster Abbey, and King Henry VI and his wife Queen Margaret are kneeling before her. Now, in that dream, she has the ambition to have a position of power, despite being the wife of the Duke of Gloucester, who is the protector of the realm. That is not actually what occurs, of course. But the line that appears on here, Duchess Eleanor says, "But list to me, my Humphrey, my sweet Duke, methought I sat in seat of majesty in the Cathedral Church of Westminster, and in that chair where kings and queens are crowned, where Henry and Dame Margaret kneeled to me, and on my head did set the diadem." In Henry VI, Part 3, the conflict of the Wars of the Roses intensifies into full-scale civil war, as King Henry VI and his wife Queen Margaret struggle to hold on to the throne against the ambitious Duke of York and his ruthless sons, Edward, George, and the future Richard III, culminating in the Yorkists seizing power and the brutal murder of King Henry VI. In this deck, the card from this play is the Queen of Crowns, Margaret of Anjou, the Queen to Henry VI. In this particular card, the line is spoken by Queen Margaret of Anjou, who then puts a paper crown on York's head. She says, "Thou wouldst be feed, I see, to make me sport. York cannot speak unless he wear a crown. A crown for York, and lords, I bow low to him. Hold you his hands, whilst I do set it on." And Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says, "This Queen of Crowns is Margaret, wife to the weak and deposed Henry VI. We see her here with the captured Edward of York, mocking him with a paper crown." So before we move into the next play, let's take a quick look at that family tree again, and look over on the right side. If you look at Richard, Duke of York, who is married to Cecily Neville, the Duchess of York, they have the sons of King Edward IV, George, Duke of Clarence, Edmund, Earl of Rutland, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who later becomes King Richard III. He marries Anne Neville in the play. So the next play we're going to be looking at is Richard III. And the little summary line is, "A deformed and ruthless villain schemes to murder his way to the English throne." It turns out that history is perhaps not as unkind to Richard III now as Shakespeare was. He may well not have been deformed at all, for instance. But be that as it may, let's go into the first character. So this is Anne Neville, pictured on the Lady of Swords. As a member of the powerful House of Neville, Anne played a critical part in the Wars of the Roses, fought between the houses of York and Lancaster for the English crown. Her father betrothed her as a girl to Prince Edward, the only son of the ousted King Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou. The marriage was to seal an alliance with the Lancastrians and halt the Wars of the Roses. But he died, and the Lancastrians were defeated at the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471. And that's where we pick up, because Richard is courting her while she is mourning her husband. He's courting her during her father-in-law's, Henry VI's, funeral procession. Anne says, "I would I knew thy heart." Richard says, "'Tis figured in my tongue." Anne, "I fear me both are false." Richard, "Then never was man true." Anne, "Well, well, put up your sword." Richard, "Say then, my peace is made." Anne, "That shalt thou know hereafter." Richard, "But shall I live in hope?" Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki states that this phrase marks a turning point where Richard has just manipulated Anne, and she ultimately agrees to put up her sword against him and to marry him despite her hatred for him. The Queen of Swords in this deck is Cecily Neville, the Duchess of York, although in the play she is just indicated as Duchess of York. And the quote that appears on here is from a longer speech. "Accursed and unquiet wrangling days, how many of you have mine eyes beheld? My husband lost his life to get the crown, and often up and down my sons were tossed, for me to joy and weep their gain and loss, and being seated in domestic broils clean overblown, themselves the conquerors make war upon themselves, brother to brother, blood to blood, self against self. O preposterous and frantic outrage, end thy damned spleen, or let me die to look on earth no more. Cecily Neville was a historical figure who survived numerous political shifts, and she was known for her strong will that she used to support her sons and navigate the Wars of the Roses. Her sons were both King Edward IV and King Richard III. And in Shakespeare's play, she is portrayed as a tragic and powerful figure who vehemently curses her son, Richard III, for his violent and treacherous actions. By the by, in case you are wondering, as I myself wondered, looking at Richard's wife and Richard's mom having the same last name, Cecily Neville was Anne Neville's great-aunt. Anne's father, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, was Cecily's nephew, making Anne a cousin once removed to Richard III. So Richard III is the King of Swords in this deck. And the line that appears on this card comes from a discussion that he is having with Buckingham. Buckingham says, "Say on, my loving lord." And Richard says, "Why, Buckingham, I say I would be king." Buckingham says, "Why, so you are, my thrice renowned lord." Richard, "Ha! Am I king? 'Tis so, but Edward lives." Buckingham, "True, noble prince." Richard, "Oh, bitter consequence, that Edward still should live, true noble prince. Ay, cousin, thou wast not wont to be so dull. Shall I be plain? I wish the bastard's dead, and I would have it suddenly performed." In this scene, he's testing his ally, the Duke of Buckingham, to see if he will fully support his ambition to become king by helping him eliminate his nephews following the death of King Edward IV. The quote highlights his open desire for the throne after a long and manipulative campaign to seize power. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki argues, as she's discussing this king, that Shakespeare was not necessarily fair in his assessment of who the man was, and that he really didn't have a choice to be fair because he was writing in patronage of those who won against him. So he was probably not as monstrous as reputed. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says, "We must ask ourselves again about the real character of this man. Was he indeed a monster, or a man who sought to carry on the Plantagenet dynasty against an intruder?" The play Richard III has as a major point the murder of the princes in the Tower. And so it's no surprise that this is the play which provides the quote for the Tower card. And this line is said by Queen Margaret of Anjou, who is the central antagonist in Richard III, a figure of rage and vengeance who curses Richard and the other characters who cause the downfall of her family. She is the widow of Henry VI and the mother of the murdered Prince Edward, and her curses are prophetic and instrumental in foreshadowing the tragic events of the play. The quote segment that is portrayed, "The presentation of but what I was, the flattering index of a direful pageant, one heaved a high to be hurled down below, a mother only mocked with two fair babes, a dream of what thou wast, a garish flag to be the aim of every dangerous shot, a sign of dignity, a breath, a bubble, a queen in jest only to fill the scene." Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki writes, "This card shows the destruction from within. Here we see the destruction not just of two young boys, but of a dynasty that had lasted for hundreds of years. But whose hand is it that pushes the young princes to their death?" The last court card in the suit of swords represents King Henry VII, when he is not yet king, when he is Henry, Earl of Richmond. Richmond is a perfect hero to vanquish Richard. He is characterized as the very antithesis of Richard. He is just, heroic, and good, whereas Richard is tyrannical, scheming, and amoral. The line that contains the quote from Richmond is a classic. "If you do sweat to put a tyrant down, you sleep in peace, the tyrant being slain. If you do fight against your country's foes, your country's fat shall pay your pains the higher." If you do fight in safeguard of your wives shall welcome home the conquerors. If you do free your children from the sword, your children's children quit it in your age. Then, in the name of God and all these rights, advance your standards, draw your willing swords. And she says of this card that it shows Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth Field. And the final card from the play of King Richard III is, of course, death. And this is showing the aftermath of the Battle of Bosworth. The line is spoken by Richard, who says, "I shall despair. There is no creature loves me, and if I die, no soul will pity me. And wherefore should they? Since that I myself find in myself no pity to myself. Methought the souls of all that I had murdered came to my tent, and every one did threat tomorrow's vengeance on the head of Richard." Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki argues that the Tudors smeared Richard III, and that Henry VII stood to gain more from the deaths of the princes in the Tower than Richard did, but that Shakespeare, writing in the time of the granddaughter of Henry VII, did the politically smart thing of making Richard Plantagenet the villain. The final play that is depicted in this deck is Henry VIII, and it supplies 2 cards. In this play, King Henry VIII's desire for a male heir leads to the downfall of his powerful advisor Cardinal Wolsey and his divorce from Queen Catherine of Aragon so that he can marry Anne Boleyn, whose eventual crowning and the birth of their daughter Elizabeth are celebrated as the start of a glorious new era for England, which of course was politically what needed to happen during the time of Queen Elizabeth. So the first of the 2 cards for this is the Hierophant, and that is depicting Cardinal Wolsey, Thomas Wolsey, who says in Act 3, Scene 2, "I know myself now, and I feel within me a peace above all earthly dignities, a still and quiet conscience." The line itself emphasizes that true peace comes from an inner sense of integrity rather than external achievements or status. And Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki says, "I chose to use Wolsey as the high priest because for all his scheming, there seems to have been a core of faith and a true sense of priesthood within him." And at last we come to the final card in this sorting of cards from the Shakespearian tarot. And this is one that she was not able to actually find a quote that really fit the mood. So it's sort of a pastiche, 2 pieces of lines that appear in a much larger speech, but referring to the baby Elizabeth. The speech is given by Thomas Cranmer, who is the leader of the English Reformation, the Archbishop of Canterbury. So after Wolsey, who is the Hierophant in this deck, loses power, he gains power. You know, this is the whole thing about not being Catholic anymore. And Cranmer says, "This royal infant, heaven still move about her, though in her cradle, yet now promises upon this land 1,000,000 blessings, which time shall bring to ripeness." And he goes on and on and on. Much later in this speech, peace, plenty, love, truth, terror, that were the servants to this chosen infant, shall then be his, and like a vine grow to him, wherever the bright sun of heaven shall shine. His honor and the greatness of his name shall be, and make new nations. He shall flourish, and like a mountain cedar never reach his branches to all the plains about him. Our children's children shall see this, and bless heaven. Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki writes, "Of all the major arcana, this was the one that had both Paul and I confounded. We projected the image of the Elizabethan age, as prophesied by the Archbishop Cranmer, and brought it to life. She, Elizabeth, was Floriana, the Golden Queen." If you have stuck with me through this long video, I thank you indeed. I do think that it might be of value, given some of the imagery being confusion, to write somewhere on the cards the book T titles. And I think that is a modification that I will do if indeed I hold on to this deck. But it is absolutely a classic and should be appreciated as such. I encourage you to go ahead and download the notes that I link to. It's a Google document that I will be sharing. In it, I have links to actual actors and not my poor self giving the various scenes that are depicted and also links to the plays as a whole. So it could be a way, if someone else is looking to learn Shakespeare through tarot, to get a real leg up on that.